Kyle showed up at my front door that Saturday morning with a box under his arm and that smile he'd worn since childhood when he wanted something. "Grandpa Harold, I brought you a gift," he said, hefting the security camera system like it weighed nothing. "For your safety." I studied the box while he explained how cameras in the living room, kitchen, and bedroom would let the family know if I fell or needed help. The bedroom part made my stomach twist uncomfortably, but Kyle's voice carried such genuine concern. "We just want to keep you safe, Grandpa. What if something happens and nobody knows?" His words made sense, I suppose. At 73, living alone, accidents could happen. But something about his eagerness bothered me. That night, lying in my own bed, I stared at the tiny red light blinking near my dresser, like a mechanical eye that never closed. The walls of my bedroom felt smaller somehow, the shadows deeper and more threatening. Something felt fundamentally wrong about being watched while I slept, but Kyle was family. I closed my eyes and tried to ignore the growing feeling that I was no longer alone in my own home, that someone was always watching now. When I asked Kyle the next week for the app to check the cameras myself, his face changed in a way I'd never seen before. "It's easier if I just manage everything from my phone," he said, waving his hand dismissively. "The technology might be confusing for you, Grandpa." The way he said it stung like a slap, like I was some confused old man who couldn't understand a simple smartphone app. I'd been using computers since before he was born, built my first website when he was still learning to tie his shoes properly. "But it's my house," I said quietly, trying to keep the hurt out of my voice. Kyle laughed and patted my shoulder in that condescending way. "Don't worry about it, Grandpa. I've got everything handled perfectly." After he left, I moved my reading glasses case on the dresser, positioning it precisely so I'd know if anyone had been near it. The unease in my chest was growing stronger each day, and I needed to test something. Something about Kyle's eagerness to control everything about these cameras didn't feel right. The way he'd shut down my request so quickly, so completely, felt more than just helpfulness. The next time I checked, my glasses case had moved 3 inches to the left, rotated at an angle I would never leave it. My silver pocket watch, the one my father gave me when I graduated high school 55 years ago, had vanished from the dresser where I'd kept it religiously for 15 years. Then $20 disappeared from the tin can where I kept emergency cash for pizza deliveries and unexpected visitors. I searched everywhere, under the bed, behind the dresser, in coat pockets I hadn't worn in months. I even asked my neighbor, Mrs. Baker, if she'd seen anything unusual while I was at the grocery store. But the pattern was too clean, too precise, too calculated. Every time Kyle visited, something went missing. The cameras weren't protecting me from thieves. They were helping one scout my belongings. My own grandson was stealing from me, systematically and deliberately, using his safety system to plan each theft like a military operation. I sat in my kitchen that evening, hands shaking as I drank my coffee, realizing the person I trusted most in this world had turned my home into his personal bank vault. The betrayal cut deeper than any physical wound ever could. When I asked Kyle the next visit to have his last visit, he chuckled and shook his head like I'd told him a funny joke. "Grandpa, you probably just moved it somewhere and forgot." He spoke slowly, carefully, like I was a child who needed simple explanations for complex adult concepts. I'd been using computers since before he was born. Built my first website when he was still learning to tie his shoes properly. "But it's my house," I said quietly, trying not to insult him. Kyle laughed and patted my shoulder in that condescending way. "Don't worry about it, Grandpa. I've got everything handled perfectly." After he left, I moved my reading glasses case on the dresser, positioning it precisely so I'd know if anyone had been there. The unease in my chest was growing stronger each day, and I needed to test something. Something about Kyle's eagerness to control everything about these cameras didn't feel right. The way he'd shut down my request so quickly, so completely, felt more than just helpfulness. The next time I checked, my glasses case had moved 3 inches to the left, rotated at an angle I would never leave it. My silver pocket watch, the one my father gave me when I graduated high school 55 years ago, had vanished from the dresser where I'd kept it religiously for 15 years. Then $20 disappeared from the tin can where I kept emergency cash for pizza deliveries and unexpected visitors. I searched everywhere, under the bed, behind the dresser, in coat pockets I hadn't worn in months. I even asked my neighbor, Mrs. Baker, if she'd seen anything unusual while I was at the grocery store. But the pattern was too clean, too precise, too calculated. Every time Kyle visited, something went missing. The cameras weren't protecting me from thieves. They were helping one scout my belongings. My own grandson was stealing from me, systematically and deliberately, using his safety system to plan each theft like a military operation. I sat in my kitchen that evening, hands shaking as I drank my coffee, realizing the person I trusted most in this world had turned my home into his personal bank vault. The betrayal cut deeper than any physical wound ever could. When I mentioned the missing watch to Kyle during his next visit, he chuckled and shook his head like I'd told him a funny joke. "Grandpa, you probably just moved it somewhere and forgot." He spoke slowly, carefully, like I was a child who needed simple explanations for complex adult concepts. It happens to everyone as they get older. Memory gets fuzzy sometimes. The condescension in his voice hit me like a slap across the face, burning with the sting of disrespect. I'd been keeping track of my belongings for 73 years. My memory was sharper than his had ever been, honed by decades of responsibility and careful attention to detail. "I didn't forget anything," I said firmly, meeting his eyes directly and refusing to back down. Kyle's smile never wavered, but something cold and calculating flickered behind it like a snake hiding in tall grass. "Of course not, Grandpa. Maybe it'll turn up somewhere unexpected." But his eyes were already scanning my dresser, cataloging what else he might take next, pricing my possessions like items in a store. I realized then that the cameras weren't just his way of stealing. They were his way of making me doubt my own mind, of gaslighting me into submission. I decided to test him properly with evidence that couldn't be explained away or dismissed. I placed $200 cash in an old cigar box and locked it in my desk drawer, the only one with a key that I kept on my keychain. I even scratched a tiny mark on the lock's surface with my fingernail to see if it had been tampered with. Kyle visited 3 days later, spending most of his time in my bedroom while I made coffee in the kitchen, listening to him move around upstairs. He left early, claiming Emily needed him home for dinner with her parents. That evening, I checked the drawer with trembling fingers, my heart pounding like a drum. The lock showed fresh scratches around the keyhole, and the cigar box was completely empty, not even a penny left behind. My chest burned with rage so hot I had to sit down and catch my breath, gripping the arms of my chair. The evidence was undeniable now. Kyle was systematically robbing me blind, stealing from his own grandfather without a shred of conscience. But I needed more than missing cash to prove it to anyone who mattered. I needed to catch him in the act, and I was starting to form a plan that would expose everything he'd done. Emily arrived the following Tuesday evening with a tuna casserole and tired eyes that hadn't been there before. She'd always been kind to me, gentle and respectful, but tonight she seemed different, suspicious, almost wary, like she was afraid of something she couldn't name. "How are you feeling, Harold?" she asked, but her voice carried an odd tension that made my skin crawl with unease. As she prepared to leave, gathering her purse and coat, she glanced at the bedroom camera and frowned deeply, her face twisting with something like disgust. "Do you really like having that thing watching you sleep every night?" The question seemed to surprise her as much as it did me, like the words had escaped without permission. "It was Kyle's idea," I said, carefully, watching her reaction closely. Her face went pale, and she stared at the blinking red light for a long, uncomfortable moment that stretched between us. "I see," she whispered, her voice barely audible above the hum of my refrigerator. Something passed across her expression, understanding, maybe, or recognition of something terrible and wrong. She left quickly after that, almost fleeing, but the look in her eyes told me she knew more about those cameras than she'd initially let on. There were secrets hiding behind her worried expression. That night, I pretended to doze in my recliner while Kyle paced the kitchen, talking on his phone in hushed, urgent tones that carried through the quiet house. I caught fragments through my barely open eyes, each word hitting me like a physical blow. "Yeah, the old man never notices anything. Just keep pulling it out little by little." My heart hammered against my ribs like it was trying to escape my chest. He wasn't just stealing trinkets and cash. He was systematically draining me of everything I had worked for. The bedroom cam gives me the perfect view of his dresser. I can see exactly when he's got money lying around, when he opens his jewelry box. I forced myself to breathe slowly, to keep my eyes closed and my body still, while my grandson discussed robbing me like I was some kind of target practice. The casual way he talked about it, the careful planning involved, the complete lack of guilt or remorse made my stomach turn violently. He wasn't just stealing, he was enjoying every minute of it, savoring the control and deception. This wasn't desperation or need. This was pure greed mixed with cruelty. The next morning, I walked to the bank with unsteady legs and requested my monthly statement early, telling the teller I needed to check something important. The numbers made me dizzy and sick to my stomach. 300 here, 500 there, transfers labeled shared utilities and family emergency fund. I'd never authorized any of this, never even heard of these mysterious accounts. "Sir, these transfers were initiated online using your account credentials," the teller explained, her voice gentle but deeply concerned. "The linked account belongs to Kyle Harrison." My hands shook as I stared at the paper, black numbers swimming before my eyes like ants crawling across the page. Kyle hadn't just been stealing cash from my dresser, he'd somehow gained complete access to my bank account, my life savings, everything I had worked 60 years to accumulate. Thousands of dollars, gone like smoke in the wind. I thought about calling the police right then, marching to the station and demanding justice, but I needed more evidence. Kyle was too smart, too careful, too good at making me look like a confused old man whose mind was slipping. He'd probably already prepared explanations, stories about my declining mental state, and grateful requests for his financial help. When I got home, I deliberately shifted the bedroom camera so it pointed toward the ceiling instead of my dresser, making the adjustment look accidental. Within 2 hours, it had been repositioned to its original angle, aimed directly at where I kept my valuables and personal belongings. Kyle was monitoring the feed closely enough to notice immediately when something changed, watching me like a hawk watches a mouse. That evening he called, his voice tight with barely controlled anger that he was trying to mask as concern. "Grandpa, I noticed the camera got moved. You need to be careful not to bump it. It's protecting you from burglars." But the concern in his voice sounded fake, rehearsed, like lines from a play he'd memorized. "Sorry," I said, making my voice sound confused and apologetic. "Must have knocked it with my elbow while dusting the furniture." After hanging up, I sat staring at that red light, knowing Kyle was probably watching me right now, studying my every move like a predator studies prey before the kill. The feeling of being hunted in my own home was suffocating, pressing down on me like a heavy blanket, but I was starting to understand exactly how his twisted system worked. Every movement I made was being recorded, analyzed, used against me. Emily returned 2 days later, bringing groceries and an odd nervousness that made her hands shake as she unpacked milk and bread. She moved around my kitchen like she was being watched, which of course she was, every gesture recorded and stored. "Kyle mentioned you've been confused lately," she said quietly, not meeting my eyes as she arranged items in my refrigerator. "He said you gave him permission to help manage your finances because you're having trouble remembering things." The lie hit me like ice water, in my veins, cold and shocking. Kyle was already building his defense, painting me as senile and grateful for his help, creating a narrative that would protect me if I'd tried to fight back. "Emily," I said carefully, "do you really believe I would give someone else control of my money without remembering it?" She finally looked at me, and I saw doubt flickering in her expression like candlelight in the wind. Her eyes darted to the kitchen camera, then back to me, fear creeping across her features like shadows at sunset. "He showed me the bank statements," she whispered, her voice barely audible above the hum of my refrigerator. But something in her voice suggested she was starting to question Kyle's version of events, beginning to see cracks in his carefully constructed lies. I knew then that I had a potential ally, if I could reach her before Kyle poisoned her mind completely against me. I decided to test Kyle's monitoring system directly with a calculated experiment. I staged a fall in the living room, deliberately dropping my cane and groaning loudly as I hit the floor, making sure the sound would carry. I lay there for exactly 10 minutes, timing it on my watch, waiting to see how quickly Kyle would respond to his surveillance system. Before I could even get up properly, my phone rang with jarring urgency that cut through the silence. "Grandpa, are you okay? I saw you fall." Kyle's voice was frantic, but something felt wrong about it. Too rehearsed, too prepared, like he'd been practicing this conversation in his head. "How did you see me fall?" I asked, trying to sound confused rather than suspicious. A pause that lasted too long, filled with the sound of Kyle scrambling for an explanation. The camera alert system. It detected unusual motion and sent me a notification." But he'd answered too quickly, like he'd been watching live, rather than responding to an automated alert. His explanation was smooth, too smooth, like he'd prepared it in advance. "I'm fine," I said, "just tripped over my own feet like a clumsy old fool." After hanging up, I realized Kyle wasn't just checking recorded footage when he felt like it. He was actively monitoring me in real time, watching my every move like I was some kind of laboratory specimen being studied for weaknesses. The next day, I told my daughter I was going for my annual checkup, but instead I drove to the bank with my evidence folder clutched tightly in my hands. I sat across from Mrs. Rodriguez, the branch manager, and explained my situation with as much calm as I could manage while my heart raced. She pulled up my account records on her computer, her fingers clicking across the keyboard, and her face grew grave as she scrolled through the transactions. "Mr. Harrison, these transfers show Kyle's name as an authorized user on your account, but I don't see your signature on the authorization forms in our system." We compared the signatures side by side on her computer screen. The one on file looked like Kyle's handwriting trying to mimic mine, but the forgery was obvious once you knew what to look for. The letters were too careful, too deliberate. "This appears to be financial elder abuse," she said, quietly, her voice heavy with professional concern and personal anger. "We can freeze the linked accounts immediately and start an investigation." I nodded, but asked her to wait just a little longer. I needed Kyle to feel secure, to keep stealing while he think he was safe, while I built an unshakable case against him that would destroy his life the way he was trying to destroy mine. Patience would be my most powerful weapon in this war. I carried my evidence to Thomas Callahan, an old friend who'd become one of the best attorneys in town over his 40-year career. His office still smelled like the pipe tobacco he'd given up years ago for his health, mixed with leather and old books. Thomas leaned back in his leather chair, studying the bank statements and police report forms I'd carefully prepared and organized. "Harold, this is textbook elder financial abuse," he said, his voice heavy with anger and professional concern that had been building for decades of similar cases. "The cameras, the unauthorized bank access, the gaslighting, Kyle's built a perfect system to exploit you systematically and completely." We spent 2 hours planning a strategy that would ensure Kyle couldn't wriggle out of consequences or talk his way to freedom. "We'll let him keep digging his hole deeper," Thomas advised, his eyes sharp behind wire-rimmed glasses that had seen too many family betrayals. "Document everything meticulously, but don't confront him yet. He's comfortable now, confident, which means he'll get sloppy and make mistakes." Thomas pulled out a legal pad and began sketching our battle plan with the precision of a general planning a campaign. That night, sleeping under the blinking red eye, I felt calmer than I had in weeks. Kyle thought he was the hunter, but the trap was being set around him with careful precision, and soon those jaws would snap shut. I stopped at the drugstore and bought a small digital recorder, the kind journalists use for interviews and investigations. The device was barely bigger than a matchbox, but promised crystal clear audio quality that would hold up in court. The next time Kyle visited, I left it running under my bed while we talked in the bedroom about my health and daily routine, him probing for weaknesses like a vulture circling wounded prey. Later, alone in my kitchen with shaking hands, I played back the recording with headphones. Kyle's voice came through crystal clear. "Don't worry, babe. Once Grandpa slips up, or we help him slip up, the house will be ours too. Emily's getting suspicious about the money, but she doesn't understand how much is at stake here." My blood ran cold, and I had to pause the recording to catch my breath and steady my trembling hands. He wasn't just stealing my savings, he was planning to take my home, my entire life's work, everything I'd built over 70 years. I was still alive, still healthy, still sharp, and my grandson was already dividing up my estate like I was dead and buried 6 feet under. The recording device felt heavy in my palm, weighted with the complete truth of what Kyle really thought of me, not as a person, but as an obstacle to his inheritance. Emily appeared at my door the next evening, pale and shaking like a leaf in a storm. She declined my offer of coffee and stood in my living room like she was afraid to sit down, afraid to get comfortable in a space that might be watching her. "Harold, I need to ask you something directly," she said, wrapping her arms around herself for comfort and protection. "Did you really tell Kyle to install a camera in your bedroom?" I shook my head slowly, watching her face carefully for any sign of what she'd discovered. "No, Emily, I didn't ask for any of this surveillance." She swallowed hard, her eyes filling with tears that threatened to spill over and ruin her carefully applied makeup. "Then what I saw Kyle doing last week makes more sense now, and it makes me sick." She didn't finish the sentence, but the horror in her voice told me everything I needed to know about what she'd witnessed. She'd caught Kyle doing something that shattered her trust in him completely, something so disturbing that it had changed how she saw her husband forever. The crack I'd been hoping for had finally appeared in their marriage, a fracture that would split their relationship apart. I could see Emily was ready to choose between her husband and what was right, between loyalty and justice. The battle lines were being drawn in my living room, and Kyle didn't even know he was losing his most important ally. Sunday dinner at my daughter's house had always been a family tradition, but tonight felt different, charged with unspoken tension that crackled like electricity before a storm. Kyle arrived with his usual charm, telling everyone how devoted he was to taking care of me in my old age. "I just want to keep Grandpa safe," he said, cutting his roast beef with steady hands while his voice dripped false concern like honey. "It's the least I can do for all he's done for our family over the years." Emily sat beside him, barely touching her food, her hands trembling every time Kyle spoke about his devotion and sacrifice. When he got up to use the bathroom, I leaned close to her ear and whispered, The walls always listen, don't they? Emily's fork clattered to her plate and she stared at me with wide, frightened eyes that had seen too much. She understood exactly what I meant. About surveillance, about being watched, about having no privacy in your own life, about living under the constant gaze of someone who meant you harm. The fear in her expression told me she was finally ready to choose sides in this war, and Kyle had no idea his carefully constructed world was crumbling around him like a house built on sand. His confident smile would soon turn to ash in his mouth. Thomas filed the paperwork to freeze any joint account transfers, but advised me to act completely normal around Kyle while the legal machinery ground into motion. "Let him think he's still in control," Thomas said, his legal mind working through every angle like a chess master planning 12 moves ahead. "The more confident he gets, the more evidence he'll give us to use against him." I began quietly moving my most valuable possessions, my father's war medals, my mother's jewelry, important documents, to a safety deposit box at a different bank across town where Kyle would never think to look. If Kyle wanted to steal my life's work, he'd find mostly empty drawers and worthless trinkets left behind like bait in a trap. Each trip to the bank felt like a small victory, taking back control one precious item at a time, reclaiming my autonomy piece by piece. Kyle was so focused on monitoring my daily routine through his cameras that he never noticed my careful preparations for war, my strategic retreat to higher ground. He thought he was watching a helpless old man shuffle around his house, but I was planning his complete destruction with the methodical precision of someone who'd lived long enough to understand patience. The cameras that were supposed to make me vulnerable would become the tools of his downfall. I accidentally unplugged the bedroom camera while dusting, making sure to look genuinely confused about the loose cord when I discovered it behind my dresser. Within an hour, Kyle was calling, his voice tight with panic that he couldn't quite disguise as concern. "Grandpa, the bedroom feed went down. You need that camera for safety. What if you fell and hit your head?" His voice carried barely controlled anger, not the concern he was trying to project to maintain his cover. The mask was slipping, and I could hear the real Kyle underneath, the one who saw me as property to be monitored. "Oh, I must have bumped something while cleaning," I said innocently, adding a tremor to my voice like a confused old man. "Should I try to fix it myself?" "No!" he said quickly, too quickly, the word exploding from him like a gunshot. "I'll come over and handle it properly. Don't touch anything else." He arrived 30 minutes later, roughly shoving the plug back into the wall and checking all the angles with obsessive precision, his movements sharp and angry. "Don't touch the equipment anymore," he said sharply, then caught himself and forced a smile that looked more like a grimace. "I mean, just be careful around it, okay, Grandpa?" I nodded obediently, but inside I was celebrating a small victory. Kyle was panicking, which meant I was winning this chess game one move at a time. Emily showed up at my door the next morning, clutching her phone and shaking so badly she could barely stand upright on my front porch. "Harold, I need to show you something, but I'm scared of what it means," she whispered, glancing around like Kyle might appear from the shadows to stop her. She led me to my kitchen table and opened an app on her phone with trembling fingers, the screen casting blue light across her pale face. "Kyle doesn't know I have access to the cloud account," she said, her voice barely audible above the refrigerator's hum. "I saw him watching your bedroom feed, but not just for safety checks like he told me. He rewinds the footage. He watches you change clothes, counts your money, even—" She couldn't finish the sentence, her face twisting with disgust and betrayal. The violation was too complete, too disturbing, too much like something a predator would do. "I thought he was trying to help you," she said through tears that ran down her cheeks. "I didn't know he was treating you like some kind of experiment or animal in a cage." That was the moment I decided to end Kyle's little game permanently, to bring his house of cards crashing down around him. The evidence was overwhelming, and I had an ally who'd seen the truth with her own eyes and couldn't unsee it. Emily's disgust would be Kyle's downfall. With Emily's help, I copied video logs from Kyle's cloud storage onto a flash drive, our hands working together over her laptop in my kitchen. She handed it to me with trembling fingers when we finished, the small device containing enough evidence to destroy Kyle's life. "This proves everything," she said, her voice hollow with betrayal and exhaustion. "The times he accessed the feeds, what he focused on, how long he watched you." The drive contained hours of footage showing Kyle scanning through recordings of my bedroom, zooming in on my dresser, noting my daily patterns with disturbing precision and scientific detachment. Some files were tagged with notes like "cache visible" and "jewelry box unlocked" and "daily routine confirmed." The evidence was overwhelming and sickening. My grandson had turned my most private space into his personal surveillance operation, studying me like a lab rat running through a maze. The flash drive felt heavier than it should have, weighted with the complete destruction of trust between us and the knowledge that someone I'd loved had seen me as nothing more than a source of income. But it was exactly what Thomas needed to finish building our case and destroy Kyle's life the way he'd tried to destroy mine. Justice would be served with digital precision. Thomas suggested one final test to catch Kyle in the act with undeniable evidence that no jury could ignore. "We'll stage some jewelry in Tash where he can see it through the camera, then cut his internet access," he explained, his strategy as precise as a surgeon's scalpel. "When he comes to fix the connection, he'll take the bait and seal his own fate." I placed my mother's fake pearl necklace and $300 in cash on my dresser, making sure both were clearly visible to the bedroom camera's unblinking eye. Then I unplugged my internet router and waited like a spider in its web. Kyle arrived within 2 hours, red-faced and aggressive, no longer bothering to hide his panic behind a mask of concern. "Grandpa, your internet's down. I need to fix it right away before something terrible happens." Emily sat in my living room, watching silently as Kyle stomped into my bedroom like he owned the place and everything in it. Through the doorway, we saw him pocket the cash without hesitation and examine the necklace carefully before deciding it wasn't valuable enough to steal. Everything was caught on the small recorder Emily had hidden under the bed earlier that morning. Kyle's theft was now documented in real time, with witnesses, with audio and video evidence that would stand up in any courtroom. The trap had snapped shut around his leg, and he didn't even know he was caught yet. I called a family meeting at my house for the next evening, telling everyone it was important and urgent. My daughter, Emily, and Kyle all gathered in my living room, though Kyle seemed agitated about something he couldn't quite name, his eyes darting around like a cornered animal. "I have some things to share with everyone," I announced calmly, setting Thomas's thick evidence folder on my coffee table like a judge laying out a death sentence. I played the audio recordings of Kyle discussing his theft plans, showed the bank statements proving unauthorized transfers, and displayed the video evidence of his surveillance activities. Kyle's face went white, then red, then white again, as the truth crashed down on him like an avalanche. "This is all a misunderstanding," he stammered, his usual confidence crumbling like a house built on sand. "Grandpa's been confused lately. He asked me to help with his finances because he can't remember things." Emily stood up slowly, her face hard as stone and twice as cold. "No, Kyle," she said quietly, her voice carrying the weight of finality. "I told you this would destroy everything we had. I told you to stop, but you wouldn't listen to reason." The room fell silent except for the sound of Kyle's heavy breathing and my own steady heartbeat counting down the seconds to his complete destruction. His world was ending, and he was finally beginning to understand the magnitude of his crimes. 2 police officers arrived that evening, responding to Thomas's carefully filed report and mountain of evidence that painted a clear picture of systematic abuse. Kyle tried to run when he saw them through the window, but Emily blocked his path to the back door with grim determination, her arms spread wide. He installed cameras in his grandfather's bedroom to steal from him, she told the officers, handing them the flash drive that contained his digital crimes. I have all the evidence you need to convict him. The handcuffs clicked around Kyle's wrists with a finality that seemed to echo through my house like a bell tolling for the dead. Kyle Harrison, you're under arrest for financial elder abuse, theft, and invasion of privacy, Officer Martinez said, reading him his rights in a steady, professional voice. As they led him toward their patrol car, Kyle looked back at me with pure hatred burning in his eyes like hellfire. "You'll die alone now," he shouted, his voice cracking with rage and desperation. "You'll die alone, and nobody will care about you or remember your name." His words stung like wasps, but they also freed me from any remaining guilt about destroying his future the way he'd tried to destroy mine. Some bridges deserved to be burned, and Kyle had lit the match himself. The boy I'd loved was gone, replaced by a predator who saw family as prey. Kyle faced multiple felony charges and eventually pleaded guilty to avoid a lengthy trial that would have exposed even more of his crimes to public scrutiny. Emily filed for divorce immediately, telling me privately, "I can't stay married to a man who would steal from his own grandfather and watch him like a pervert." She kept their house in the settlement, and Kyle moved back in with his parents, who stopped speaking to me entirely, convinced I'd somehow corrupted their innocent son with my vindictive old age. My daughter struggled with the situation for months, but eventually supported my decision to press charges. "I raised him to be better than this," she said through tears one evening. "You did what you had to do, Dad. I'm proud of you for fighting back." The whole family was fractured now, relationships broken beyond any hope of repair, scattered like pieces of a shattered vase. I felt grief, not for losing Kyle, but for the good man I'd hoped he might become someday, for the grandson who'd existed only in my imagination. Sometimes justice comes at a terrible price that echoes through generations, but silence would have cost me everything I'd worked for my entire life. At least this way, I still had my dignity, my independence, and my self-respect. Those things were worth more than any family relationship built on lies and exploitation. I sit now in my quiet house, the red lights gone and the cameras dismantled into harmless pieces of plastic and wire that hold no power over me. My money is secure in accounts Kyle can never touch again, protected by legal barriers he'll never breach. My privacy has been restored and my dignity stands intact despite everything he tried to steal from me. I still tend my tomato garden every morning and drink my evening beer on the porch, but the peace feels different now, earned through struggle rather than given freely by a world that respected age. When people ask about Kyle, I tell them the truth without shame or reservation. Never mistake surveillance for safety, and never let someone install cameras in your soul where they can watch your most vulnerable moments. Kyle learned this lesson the hardest way possible, losing his marriage, his freedom, and his future in one swift blow delivered by justice. But perhaps his story will save another family from the same betrayal and heartbreak, another grandfather from the same violation. That's why I'm sharing this painful truth, because silence about abuse only protects the abuser, and I refuse to be silent about what my grandson did to me in the name of love. Some lessons can only be learned through complete destruction, and Kyle chose his path the moment he decided I was worth more dead than alive. If you enjoyed this story, make sure to like this video, comment, and smash the subscribe button. Also check out other videos on the channel. Joe's got more interesting stories for you.